There are moments in history when death refuses to follow its own rules. When a body cold and lifeless suddenly draws breath again. When witnesses swear under oath that they saw the impossible. Eliza Wells died twice in Charleston, South Carolina in 1848. Both times doctors confirmed her death. Both times she was prepared for burial, and both times she returned. What the medical journals refused to publish. What the city's elite desperately tried to bury alongside her empty coffin, and what 36 witnesses testified to seeing with their own eyes remained hidden in private letters and sealed court documents for over a century. Tonight, you'll hear what really happened to the girl who defied death, not once, but twice. Before we continue with the story of Eliza Wells, I want you to do something for me. If you're listening to this right now, drop a comment below telling me what state or city you're from. I'm curious to see how far these dark stories travel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now because the story you're about to hear will make you question everything you thought you knew about life, death, and what lies between. Now, let me take you back to a time when Charleston was a city of contradictions, where the story of one young woman would shake the foundations of everything its people believed. Charleston in 1848 was a city built on the backs of enslaved people, yet it prided itself on refinement and culture. The cobblestone streets of the French Quarter echoed with the clip-clop of horses pulling carriages filled with ladies in silk dresses and gentlemen in tar hats. Grand mansions lined the Battery, their piazzas facing the harbor, where ships brought cotton, rice, and human cargo. The air always carried the scent of salt water mixed with magnolia blossoms, and in the summer months, the oppressive humidity made even breathing feel like labor. The Wells family occupied an unusual position in this rigidly stratified society. Eliza's father, Marcus Wells, was a free black man, a rarity in the antebellum South. His freedom had been purchased by his own father, a skilled carpenter who had saved for 20 years to buy his son's liberty. Marcus had inherited his father's talent with wood and had built a successful furniture-making business that served some of Charleston's wealthiest white families. His craftsmanship was so exceptional that even the most prejudiced customers swallowed their pride to commission his work. Marcus had married Catherine, a woman of mixed heritage whose grandmother had been a free woman of color from Haiti. Catherine worked as a seamstress, her delicate embroidery, sought after by Charleston's elite women who would never invite her through their front doors but gladly paid premium prices for her artistry. Together they had managed to purchase a modest house on Beaufort Street in a neighborhood where free people of color clustered together, creating a small community within the larger city. Eliza was their only child. Born in 1832 when Catherine was nearly 40 years old, a miracle baby as her mother called her. From the beginning, Eliza was different. She was exceptionally bright, learning to read by age 4 by watching her mother work through the Bible. By 7, she could calculate figures faster than her father, helping him with his business accounts. But it was her physical constitution that truly set her apart. Eliza suffered from what the doctors of the time called cataleptic fits, sudden episodes where her body would become rigid, her breathing would slow to almost nothing, and she would seem to slip away from consciousness entirely. The first time it happened when she was 9 years old, her parents thought she had died. Catherine's screams brought neighbors running, but after nearly an hour, Eliza had simply opened her eyes and asked what everyone was crying about. Dr. Nathaniel Howell, one of the few physicians in Charleston who would treat free black patients, examined Eliza extensively after that first episode. He was a thin, scholarly man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually worried expression. He had studied in Philadelphia and had read about similar cases in European medical journals. "It's a disorder of the nervous system," he explained to Marcus and Catherine in his cramped office above an apothecary shop. The French call it catalepsy. The body enters a state that mimics death. The muscles become rigid, the heartbeat and breathing slow to the point of being imperceptible. But the person is not dead, merely suspended. "Will she die from it?" Catherine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Howell removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, a habit he had when delivering difficult news. "I don't know. The literature is sparse. Some patients experience these episodes throughout their lives with no ill effects. Others," he paused, "others have been buried alive." The words hung in the air like a curse. From that day forward, the Wells family lived with a constant gnawing fear. Eliza's episodes became more frequent as she grew older, sometimes once a month, sometimes several times a week. Each time, her parents would watch helplessly as their daughter's body went rigid, her eyes rolling back, her breathing becoming so shallow that a mirror held to her lips would barely fog. But Eliza was resilient. Between episodes, she was vibrant and curious, with a sharp wit that sometimes got her into trouble. She had her mother's delicate features and her father's strong will. By 16, she had become a beautiful young woman with deep brown skin, expressive dark eyes, and hair she wore in intricate braids that Catherine taught her to style. Despite the limitations placed on free black people in Charleston, they couldn't testify in court against white people, couldn't gather in groups of more than 7, had to carry papers proving their free status at all times. Eliza refused to be diminished. She helped her father in his workshop, learning to carve and sandwood with precision. She assisted her mother with sewing, her stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, and she read everything she could get her hands on, borrowing books from Dr. Howell's personal library. It was Dr. Howell who introduced Eliza to Samuel Pritchard, a young man who worked as a clerk in a shipping office. Samuel was also free, his family having been granted freedom 3 generations back. He was tall and serious, with careful manners and ambitions to one day own his own business. He had noticed Eliza at church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church on Calhoun Street, where free black people and enslaved people who had permission from their owners gathered for worship. Samuel began courting Eliza properly, with her parents' permission, visiting on Sunday afternoons and walking with her through the small park where people of color were permitted. He knew about her condition. Everyone in their small community did, but it didn't deter him. "My grandmother had the falling sickness," he told Eliza one warm afternoon in April 1848. They were sitting on a bench beneath a live oak tree, its branches draped with Spanish moss that swayed in the breeze. She lived to be 73 years old. An affliction doesn't define a person. Eliza smiled at him, genuinely touched. "Most men would run." "Most men are fools," Samuel replied, and for the first time he took her hand. That small gesture of affection, that moment of hope, and normally would be one of the last peaceful memories before everything fell apart. The first death came on a Tuesday in late May. The day had started unremarkably. Eliza woke early as she always did and helped her mother prepare breakfast. Harmony grits with butter and coffee made from chori root. Her father had already left for his workshop, where he was finishing an elaborate dining table for the Middleton family, one of Charleston's oldest and wealthiest dynasties. The morning was already hot, the kind of oppressive heat that made clothes stick to skin and turned any physical labor into an ordeal. Eliza spent the morning helping her mother with laundry, hauling water from the cistern, and scrubbing clothes on a washboard until her hands were raw. By noon, she complained of a headache. "Go lie down," Catherine told her, wiping sweat from her own brow. "This heat is ungodly." Eliza retreated to her small room at the back of the house. It was simply furnished. A narrow bed with a quilt Catherine had made, a small dresser, a chair, and a shelf with her few precious books. She lay down on top of the covers, not bothering to undress, and closed her eyes. Catherine found her 2 hours later. She had come to check on her daughter, bringing a cup of cool water, but when she entered the room, something was immediately wrong. Eliza lay perfectly still, her body rigid, her eyes half open and staring at nothing. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and when Catherine touched her hand, it was cold. "Eliza." Catherine's voice was sharp with panic. "Eliza, baby, wake up." Nothing. No response, no movement. Catherine pressed her ear to Eliza's chest, listening desperately for a heartbeat. She heard nothing. She held her hand in front of Eliza's mouth and nose, feeling for breath. Nothing. The scream that tore from Catherine's throat brought neighbors running. Within minutes, the small house was filled with people. Women from the neighborhood, the elderly Mr. Foster from next door, the Reverend Thomas from their church who happened to be visiting someone nearby. Everyone reached the same conclusion. Eliza Wells was dead. Marcus was summoned from his workshop. He arrived running, sawdust still clinging to his clothes, and pushed through the crowd to his daughter's room. When he saw Eliza lying there so still and cold, something broke inside him. He gathered her rigid body into his arms and wept with a sound that those present would remember for the rest of their lives. A deep animal howl of grief that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. Dr. Howell was sent for immediately. He arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand, his face grave. He examined Eliza thoroughly, checking for a pulse at her wrist, her neck, her ankle. He listened to her chest with his stethoscope. He held a candle flame near her eyes to see if the pupils would react. He pry-cricked her finger with a needle to see if she would flinch. Nothing. No response to any stimulus. Finally, Dr. Howell straightened up and removed his spectacles. His hands were shaking slightly. "I'm so very sorry." he said quietly. She's gone. Catherine collapsed. Marcus stood frozen, unable to process the words. The neighbors began the familiar rituals of death, covering mirrors, stopping the clock in Eliza's room at 2:47 p.m., the time Dr. Howell officially pronounced her dead. But Dr. Howell pulled Marcus aside, away from the others. I need to tell you something, he said in a low voice. Given Eliza's condition, given her history of cataleptic episodes, I want to be absolutely certain. I'm going to note in my records that she should not be buried for at least 48 hours. I want to observe her to be completely sure. Marcus nodded numbly. You think she might? I think we need to be careful, Dr. Howell said. That's all. Word spread quickly through Charleston's free black community. By evening, a steady stream of visitors came to pay their respects. Samuel Pritchard arrived and sat beside Eliza's body for hours, holding her cold hand, tears streaming silently down his face. The women of the church brought food. The men offered to help Marcus build a coffin. Eliza's body was laid out in the front room, dressed in her best dress, a simple but elegant blue cotton that Catherine had made for her. Her hands were folded across her chest. Candles were lit around her. People came and went, praying, singing hymns, sharing memories of the bright young woman who had been taken too soon. Dr. Howell visited 3 times that first day, each time examining Eliza's body carefully. Each time he found no signs of life. Her body remained rigid, cold, unresponsive. The grayish pallor of her skin deepened. By the second day, the faint smell of decay began to permeate the room. I was wrong, Dr. Howell admitted to Marcus on the evening of the second day. I thought perhaps, but no, she's truly gone. I'm sorry. Marcus began building the coffin that night, working by lamplight in his workshop. It was the hardest thing he had ever made. Each planed board, each careful joint felt like a betrayal. He built it from cherry wood with brass handles, making it as beautiful as he knew how. It was all he could do for his daughter. Now the funeral was scheduled for Thursday morning, 3 days after Eliza's death. The service would be held at the African Methodist Episcopal Church, with burial to follow in the small cemetery behind it, where free people of color were permitted to bury their dead. Wednesday evening, the night before the funeral, Catherine insisted on sitting alone with her daughter one last time. The house had finally emptied of visitors. Marcus had gone to the church to make final arrangements. Catherine sat in a chair beside the table where Eliza's body lay, holding her daughter's cold hand, and prayed. She prayed for hours, her voice from crying, begging God for a miracle she knew wouldn't come. She recited every prayer she knew, every psalm, every hymn. She talked to Eliza, telling her stories from her childhood, reminding her of happy times, asking for forgiveness for every harsh word she'd ever spoken. It was nearly midnight when Catherine's exhaustion finally overcame her grief. Her head nodded forward and she dozed in the chair, still holding Eliza's hand. She woke to the sound of gasping. For a moment, disoriented in the darkness, the candles had burned low. Catherine thought she had dreamed it. But then she heard it again, a desperate, rattling intake of breath. She looked at Eliza. Her daughter's chest was moving, rising and falling rapidly, as if she had been underwater and had just broken the surface. Her eyes, which had been half open and glazed for 3 days, suddenly focused. Her fingers, which had been cold and rigid, twitched in Catherine's hand. "Mama!" Eliza's voice was barely a whisper, dry and cracked. Catherine screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of shock so profound it bypassed all rational thought. She leapt from her chair, stumbling backward, her mind unable to reconcile what her eyes were seeing. Eliza was sitting up slowly, stiffly, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, but she was moving. She was breathing. She was alive. "Mama, what's wrong?" Eliza's voice was confused, frightened. "Why are you screaming? Why am I?" She looked down at herself, at the dress she was wearing, at the candles around her. "Why am I in the front room? What happened?" Catherine couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what was happening. The front door burst open. Marcus had heard the scream from down the street and had run back to the house, fearing an intruder or fire. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes going wide. "Eliza!" His voice was barely audible. "Papa!" Eliza turned toward him and the movement seemed to cause her pain. She winced, pressing a hand to her chest. "Papa, what's happening? Why does everyone look so frightened? Why do I feel so strange?" Marcus moved first. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Eliza into his arms, holding her so tightly she gasped. He was shaking, his whole body trembling. And when Catherine finally found the strength to move, she joined them, the 3 of them holding each other and crying. Though whether from joy or terror or sheer incomprehension, None of them could have said. Neighbors hearing the commotion began to arrive. The first to enter was Mrs. Foster from next door, and when she saw Eliza alive, moving, speaking, she fainted dead away. Others crowded in behind her, and the small house erupted into chaos. Some people screamed, some prayed, some ran away, convinced they were seeing a ghost or a demon. Someone had the presence of mind to send for Dr. Howell. He arrived at a run, his shirt half-buttoned, his medical bag clutched in his hand. He pushed through the crowd and stopped, staring at Eliza with an expression of absolute disbelief. "This isn't possible," he whispered. But Eliza was there, undeniably alive, sitting on the edge of the table and looking around at the chaos with growing distress. "Dr. Howell, please," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Please tell me what's happening. Why is everyone acting like this? What's wrong with me?" Dr. Howell approached slowly, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. He took her wrist and felt for a pulse. It was there, rapid but strong and steady. He listened to her heart. It was beating. He looked into her eyes. The pupils contracted normally when he held up a candle. "Eliza," he said carefully, "what is the last thing you remember?" She frowned, thinking. I had a headache. Mama told me to lie down. I went to my room and her frown deepened. I don't remember anything after that. It's like I fell asleep, but I had strange dreams, dark dreams. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I could hear things, voices, crying. I heard Mama crying and Papa and Samuel. I wanted to tell them I was all right, but I couldn't make my body work. It was like being trapped. She looked up at Dr. Howell, her eyes wide and frightened. "How long was I asleep?" "Eliza," Dr. Howell said gently, "you weren't asleep. You were dead. You've been dead for 3 days." The room fell absolutely silent. Eliza stared at him. "That's not possible. I examined you myself multiple times. You had no heartbeat, no breath, no response to any stimulus. Your body was cold and rigid. You showed signs of decay. I pronounced you dead, Eliza. I signed the death certificate. Your funeral is scheduled for tomorrow morning." Eliza looked around the room at the candles, at her dress, at the faces of the neighbors staring at her with a mixture of wonder and fear. She looked at her parents, saw the truth in their tear-stained faces. "I died." Her voice was small, childlike. "You died," Dr. Howell confirmed, "and somehow, impossibly, you came back." The news spread through Charleston like wildfire. By dawn, a crowd had gathered outside the Wells house. Free black people, enslaved people who had snuck away from their owners, and even some white people drawn by the impossible story, the girl who had died and come back to life. Some came out of curiosity, some out of faith, believing they were witnessing a miracle. Others came out of fear, convinced that something unnatural had occurred. Dr. Howell spent the entire night examining Eliza, documenting everything. He measured her pulse, her temperature, her breathing. He tested her reflexes, her memory, her physical strength, apart from some stiffness in her muscles and a lingering weakness. She seemed perfectly healthy. More than that, she seemed perfectly normal, as if the past 3 days had been nothing more than a deep sleep. "I need to write to my colleagues," Dr. Howell said to Marcus as the sun rose. "This is unprecedented. The medical journals need to know about this. This could change everything we understand about death, about catalepsy, about no." Marcus's voice was firm. No journals, no letters, no publicity. Dr. Howell looked at him in surprise. "But Marcus, this is a medical miracle. The scientific community will want to study her like an animal in a menagerie," Marcus interrupted. "They'll want to poke and prod her to put her on display. And worse," he lowered his voice, "worse, there are people in this city who will say she's possessed, that she's a demon or a witch. You know how people think. You know what they'll do." Dr. Howell fell silent because he did know. He had seen what fear and superstition could do, especially in a city where the majority of black people were enslaved and where even free people of color lived under constant suspicion and control. "We tell people it was a mistake," Marcus continued. "We say she was in a very deep cataleptic state, so deep that it mimicked death, but that she was never truly dead. We say I was wrong to allow the funeral preparations to proceed so quickly. We take the blame and we move on. But I examined her," Dr. Howell protested multiple times. "She was dead, Marcus. Clinically, medically dead. I would stake my reputation on it. Then don't stake your reputation, Marcus said quietly. Stake hers, stake her life. Because if people believe she truly died and came back, they won't see a miracle. They'll see something to fear, and fear makes people dangerous. Dr. Howell wanted to argue, but he couldn't. He knew Marcus was right. So, they crafted a story. Dr. Howell wrote a revised report stating that he had made an error in his initial examination, that Eliza had been in an extremely deep catalic state that had mimicked death so closely that even a trained physician had been deceived. He noted that her condition was a known, if rare, medical phenomenon, and that while her recovery was remarkable, it was not supernatural. But the damage was already done. The story had spread too far, too fast. Within days, people from all over Charleston were coming to see the girl who had died and returned. Some brought sick relatives, begging Eliza to touch them, convinced she had been blessed with healing powers. Others came to condemn her, shouting Bible verses about witchcraft and consorting with demons. The Wells family tried to maintain normally. Marcus returned to his workshop. Catherine resumed her sewing. Eliza attempted to help with household chores, but nothing was normal anymore. People stared at her on the street. Children ran away from her. Former friends crossed to the other side of the road to avoid her. Samuel Pritchard was one of the few who stood by her. He came to visit every day, sitting with Eliza in the small parlor, talking about ordinary things, the weather, the ships in the harbor, plans for the future. He treated her exactly as he had before, and for that Eliza was profoundly grateful. "Do you think I'm cursed?" she asked him. One afternoon in June, they were sitting on the pozza, the heat making the air shimmer. "No," Samuel said firmly. "I think you have a medical condition that we don't fully understand yet. That's all. People think I'm a demon. People are ignorant. The Reverend won't let me come to church anymore. He says my presence disturbs the congregation." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Then the Reverend is a fool." Eliza managed a small smile. "You're very kind to me." "I'm not being kind," Samuel said, taking her hand. "I'm being honest. You're the same person you were before." Nothing has changed, but everything had changed, and they both knew it. For 6 weeks, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. The crowds outside the Wells house dwindled. The gossip, while it never fully stopped, became less intense. Eliza's strength returned, and her cataleptic episodes surprisingly seemed to have decreased in frequency. Dr. Howell theorized that perhaps the extended episode had somehow reset her nervous system, though he admitted he was merely guessing. Marcus received a major commission, a complete set of bedroom furniture for a wealthy planter from Beaufort. It was the kind of work that could support the family for months. Catherine's embroidery business, which had suffered during the scandal, began to recover as her regular customers quietly returned. Samuel formally asked Marcus for permission to marry Eliza. Marcus, after a long conversation with his daughter, gave his blessing. They planned a small, quiet wedding for the fall after the worst of the summer heat had passed. For a brief moment, it seemed like the nightmare was over. Then, on a humid afternoon in early July, Eliza died again. She was in the market with her mother buying vegetables for dinner. It was crowded, noisy, the air thick with the smell of fish and produce and unwashed bodies. Eliza had been feeling fine, tired from the heat, but fine. She was examining a basket of tomatoes when she suddenly went rigid. Catherine saw it happen, saw her daughter's eyes roll back, saw her body lock up and begin to fall. Catherine caught her before she hit the ground, screaming for help, but this time was different from her previous episodes. This time, Eliza didn't just become rigid. Her skin turned gray within seconds, her lips took on a bluish tinge, and when Catherine pressed her ear to Eliza's chest, she heard nothing. No heartbeat, no breath. "No," Catherine whispered. "No, no, no, not again. Please, God, not again." People crowded around, some trying to help, others just gawking. Someone ran for Dr. Howell, someone else ran to fetch Marcus. The market descended into chaos with vendors abandoning their stalls and customers pressing in to see what was happening. Dr. Howell arrived quickly. His office was only a few blocks away. He pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Eliza's body. He went through his examination quickly, efficiently, his face growing more grim with each passing second. No pulse, no breath, no response to any stimulus. He looked up at Catherine, and the expression on his face said everything. "No," Catherine said, her voice rising. "No, you're wrong. You were wrong before. She'll wake up. She'll wake up like she did before." "Catherine, she'll wake up." Catherine was screaming now, clutching Eliza's body. "She'll wake up. She always wakes up." Marcus arrived and had to physically pull his wife away so that Dr. Howell could continue his examination. But there was nothing to examine. Eliza Wells was dead again. This time the reaction was different. This time people weren't just shocked or grieving, they were frightened, angry, suspicious. "It's not natural," someone in the crowd muttered. "She's cursed." Another voice said, "She shouldn't have come back the first time. This is God's judgment." Dr. Howell ordered Eliza's body to be taken back to the Wells house. He examined her there more thoroughly than before, documenting everything. He checked for poison, for signs of violence, for any explanation. He found nothing. Just like before, Eliza had simply stopped. But this time, Dr. Howell was determined to be absolutely certain before pronouncing her dead. He had been wrong once, or so he had claimed in his revised report. He wouldn't make that mistake again. He stayed with the body for 12 hours straight, checking for any sign of life every 30 minutes. He used every test he knew. He pricked her with needles, held flames near her skin, shouted in her ear, pressed on her chest. Nothing. No response. By midnight, he was forced to accept the truth. Eliza Wells was dead for the second time. He signed the death certificate with a shaking hand. The funeral was scheduled for 2 days later on Saturday. This time, there would be no delays, no waiting period. The body would be buried quickly before anything else could happen. But the city was in an uproar. The story of Eliza Wells, the girl who had died, come back to life and then died again, had spread beyond Charleston's free black community. It was being discussed in white parlors, in churches, in taverns. Newspapers picked up the story, printing sensationalized accounts that bore little resemblance to the truth. Some called it a miracle. Others called it witchcraft. Religious leaders debated whether Eliza had been resurrected by God or reanimated by the devil. Medical men argued about catalepsy, suspended animation, and the nature of death itself. The controversy became so heated that the mayor's office issued a statement urging calm and dismissing the entire affair as a medical curiosity blown out of proportion by superstition. But for Marcus and Catherine Wells, there was no controversy, no debate. There was only grief. A grief made infinitely worse by the fact that they had already mourned their daughter once, had already experienced the impossible joy of her return, and now had to face her loss again. Samuel Pritchard was devastated. He sat with Eliza's body through the night before the funeral, talking to her as if she could hear him, begging her to come back again, promising that he would take care of her, no matter what, that he didn't care what people said or thought. But Eliza didn't wake up. Friday passed. The body remained cold, rigid, unresponsive. The smell of decay began to permeate the house. Dr. Howell visited multiple times, each time confirming that there was no change, no sign of life. Saturday morning arrived. The funeral would be at 10 o'clock. The church was packed not just with people who knew Eliza, but with curiosity seekers, with people who wanted to witness the burial of the girl who had defied death once and might do so again. The Reverend, despite his earlier reluctance, agreed to perform the service, though his sermon focused heavily on accepting God's will and not questioning the mysteries of life and death. The coffin, the same beautiful cherry wood coffin Marcus had built weeks earlier, was carried to the cemetery by 6 men from the community. Marcus had insisted on being one of them, though his legs shook so badly he could barely walk. The grave had been dug in a corner of the cemetery beneath a magnolia tree. It was a beautiful spot, peaceful and shaded. Catherine had chosen it. The coffin was lowered into the ground. The Reverend said the final prayers. People began to file past, dropping flowers into the grave, saying their goodbyes. And then, from inside the coffin, came a sound. A thump, muffled but unmistakable. The crowd froze. Another thump and then, clear and desperate, a voice. "Let me out, please. I can't breathe. Let me out." For a moment, no one moved. No one could move. The impossibility of what they were hearing had paralyzed them all. Then Samuel Pritchard broke from the crowd and jumped into the grave. He landed hard on top of the coffin and began clawing at the lid, screaming for tools, for help, for someone to do something. Marcus and 2 other men jumped in after him. Someone ran for a crowbar. The crowd pressed in, everyone shouting, some praying, some crying, some backing away in terror. The coffin lid was pried open. Eliza was inside, alive, her eyes wide with terror, her hands bloody from where she had been pounding on the wood. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving, her face streaked with tears. Samuel pulled her out of the coffin and lifted her out of the grave. She collapsed in his arms, sobbing, shaking, unable to speak. The crowd erupted. Some people screamed, some fainted, some ran away, some fell to their knees, convinced they were witnessing a miracle or a curse or the end of the world. Dr. Howell pushed through the chaos and examined Eliza right there in the cemetery. She was alive, undeniably, impossibly alive. Her heart was beating. She was breathing. She was conscious and aware. "How long?" she gasped, clinging to Samuel. "How long was I in there?" "2 days," Dr. Howell said, his voice shaking. "You've been dead for 2 days." Eliza began to scream. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in Charleston intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. The aftermath of Eliza's second resurrection was catastrophic. The story exploded beyond Charleston, spreading throughout South Carolina and into neighboring states. Newspapers from as far away as New York and Boston picked up the tale. Some publications treated it as a medical curiosity, others as proof of divine intervention, still others as evidence of demonic possession. The Wells family home was besieged. People camped outside demanding to see Eliza, to touch her, to hear her story. Some brought sick relatives, convinced she could heal them. Others brought Bibles and crosses, convinced she needed to be exorcised. The local authorities had to post guards to keep the crowds under control. Religious leaders were divided. Some preachers declared Eliza a miracle, proof of God's power over death. Others condemned her as an abomination, something that should not exist, a violation of natural law. There were calls for her to be examined by church authorities, to be tested, to be proven holy or unholy. Medical men from across the country wrote to Dr. Howell demanding details, questioning his competence, proposing theories. Some suggested she had never truly died. The Dr. Howell was simply an incompetent physician who couldn't tell the difference between death and deep unconsciousness. Others proposed that Eliza had some unique physiological condition that allowed her to enter a state of suspended animation. A few even suggested fraud, that the entire affair was an elaborate hoax. But Dr. Howell knew the truth. He had examined Eliza both times. He had found no heartbeat, no breath, no signs of life. He had observed her body for hours, had performed every test he knew. She had been dead, clinically, medically, undeniably dead. And then she had come back. He wrote a detailed report of both incidents documenting everything he had observed. He submitted it to the Charleston Medical Journal, hoping for publication. The journal rejected it. The editor wrote back that while Dr. Howell's reputation was respected, the claims in his report were simply too extraordinary to be believed, and publishing them would damage the journal's credibility. Dr. Howell tried other journals. All rejected the report, some politely, some dismissively, some with outright accusations of fraud or incompetence. Frustrated and desperate to understand what had happened, Dr. Howell began researching similar cases. He wrote to colleagues in Europe where medical science was more advanced. He scoured medical libraries for any reference to similar phenomena. What he found was disturbing. There were other cases, not many, but they existed. Cases of people who had been pronounced dead, prepared for burial, and then revived. Most of these cases had occurred in Europe in previous centuries, and most had ended badly with the resurrected person being accused of witchcraft and executed, or being shunned by their communities and dying in poverty and isolation. But there were a few medical accounts written by physicians who had witnessed these events and tried to understand them. The term they used was apparent death, a state so closely resembling death that even trained medical professionals could be deceived. The causes were varied: catalepsy, certain poisons, extreme cold, severe trauma. In some cases, the person had been in this state for days before reviving. Dr. Howell became convinced that this was what had happened to Eliza. Her cataleptic condition combined with some unknown factor. Perhaps the heat, perhaps stress, perhaps something in her unique physiology had caused her to enter a state of apparent death so profound that it had fooled everyone, including him. But that didn't explain why it had happened twice, or why, in both cases, she had shown clear signs of decay, the gray skin, the smell, the coldness before reviving. Dr. Howell had no answers, only questions that kept him awake at night. For Eliza, the experience was traumatic beyond words. She remembered the darkness, the paralysis, the sensation of being trapped in her own body, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to signal that she was still there, still aware. She remembered hearing voices, her parents crying, Samuel begging her to wake up, Dr. A. Howell pronouncing her dead. She remembered the terror of trying to scream, trying to move, and being unable to do either. And she remembered the coffin, The absolute darkness, the smell of wood and fabric, the realization that she was enclosed, buried, that no one knew she was alive, the panic that had seized her, the desperate pounding on the lid, the screaming until her voice was raw, the certainty that she was going to die there, truly die, suffocating in the dark. She had nightmares every night. She would wake up screaming, convinced she was back in the coffin, that the darkness was closing in. Samuel, who had moved into the Wells house to help care for her, would hold her until the panic passed, whispering reassurances that she was safe, that she was alive, that he wouldn't let anything happen to her. But Eliza didn't feel safe. She felt like she was living on borrowed time, like death was stalking her, waiting for another chance. "What if it happens again?" she asked Dr. Howell during one of his visits. "What if I die again and this time no one hears me? What if they bury me and I wake up and I'm alone in the dark and no one comes?" Dr. Howell had no comfort to offer because he was thinking the same thing. He proposed a solution, a safety coffin. "They're used in Europe," he explained to Eliza and her parents. "Coffins designed with a bell or a flag attached to a string that runs down into the coffin. If the person wakes up, they can pull the string and alert people above ground." Marcus was horrified. "You're talking about preparing for her to die again." "I'm talking about preparing for the possibility," Dr. Howell said gently. "If Eliza enters this state again, and given her history, we have to assume she might. We need to ensure that she can signal for help." It was a grim conversation, but a necessary one. Marcus agreed to build a modified coffin with a bell system. It sat in his workshop, a constant reminder of the nightmare they were living. But weeks passed and Eliza remained healthy. Her cataleptic episodes, which had been so frequent before, seemed to have stopped entirely. She regained her strength, her color, her vitality. She began to hope that perhaps the worst was over, that whatever had caused those two terrible deaths had passed. Samuel proposed marriage again. This time, Eliza accepted without hesitation. They were married in a small private ceremony in the Wells home with only family and a few close friends present. No church would agree to host the wedding. Eliza was too controversial, too frightening, but it didn't matter. Eliza and Samuel were happy. They moved into a small house Samuel had been saving to buy, just a few streets away from her parents. Samuel's employer, impressed by his dedication and work ethic, promoted him to a position with more responsibility and better pay. Eliza helped him with bookkeeping and correspondence, her sharp mind and education making her an invaluable partner. For nearly a year, life was good. Eliza and Samuel talked about starting a family. Marcus's furniture business thrived. Catherine's embroidery was in high demand. The scandal slowly faded, replaced by new gossip and new controversies. Dr. Howell published a paper in a small medical journal carefully worded to avoid sensationalism, discussing catalepsy and apparent death. He didn't mention Eliza by name, but those who knew the story recognized the case he was describing. The paper was largely ignored by the medical establishment, but a few physicians wrote to him with interest and a small correspondence network developed. Everything seemed to be returning to normal. And then in the spring of 1850, Eliza became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Eliza suffered from severe nausea, exhaustion, and dizzy spells. Dr. Howell monitored her closely, worried that the stress on her body might trigger another cataleptic episode. But weeks passed, then months, and while Eliza was uncomfortable, she remained stable. Samuel was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a father. He doted on Eliza, bringing her anything she craved, reading to her in the evenings, rubbing her swollen feet. Marcus built a cradle from walnut wood with intricate carvings of flowers and birds. Catherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches as perfect as ever. The baby was due in late September. As summer turned to fall, Eliza grew larger and more uncomfortable, but also more excited. She talked constantly about the baby, about names, about what kind of parent she wanted to be. The fear that had haunted her for so long seemed to fade, replaced by hope and anticipation. On September 23, 1850, Eliza went into labor. It was a long, difficult labor. Dr. Howell attended along with an experienced midwife named Mrs. Patterson. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Eliza was exhausted, in pain, but determined. Finally, in the late afternoon, the baby was born. A girl, small but healthy, with a powerful set of lungs that she used to announce her arrival to the world. Eliza held her daughter for the first time, tears streaming down her face, and felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. Samuel stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, staring at his daughter with wonder. "What should we name her?" he asked softly. Eliza looked down at the tiny, perfect face. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace." For 2 hours, everything was perfect. Eliza nursed the baby. Samuel held her. Catherine and Marcus came to meet their granddaughter. Dr. Howell examined both mother and child and pronounced them healthy, and then Eliza started to feel strange. "I'm dizzy," she said, her voice slurring slightly. I feel. Her eyes rolled back, her body went rigid. The baby, still in her arms, began to slip. Samuel caught Grace before she fell. Dr. Howell rushed to Eliza's side, already knowing what he would find. No pulse, no breath, no response. Eliza Wells was dead. For the third time, but this time, Dr. Howell was prepared. This time, he didn't pronounce her dead. He didn't allow anyone to prepare her body for burial. He didn't let anyone give up hope. "Get her to the bed," he ordered, "and someone bring me my full medical kit from my office." Now, for the next 48 hours, Dr. Howell stayed with Eliza's body, monitoring it constantly. He had brought equipment, a new stethoscope, a more sensitive thermometer, a device for measuring the faintest breath. He checked her every 30 minutes, documenting everything. Her body showed all the signs of death: the gray pallor, the coldness, the rigidity, the absence of any detectable heartbeat or breath. But Dr. Howell refused to give up. He had seen her come back twice before. He believed she would come back again. Marcus and Catherine kept vigil with him. Samuel paced the house, holding baby Grace, torn between grief for his wife and joy for his daughter. The house was silent except for the baby's occasional cries and the ticking of the clock. 24 hours passed, no change. 36 hours, no change. 48 hours, still no change. Dr. Howell's hope began to waver. He had never seen Eliza remain in this state for more than 2 days before. If she was going to wake up, she should have done so by now. "Maybe this time is different," Catherine whispered. "Maybe this time she's really gone." Dr. Howell didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. 50 hours, 52, 54. And then at 56 hours after her collapse, Eliza gasped. It was a small sound, barely audible, but Dr. Howell heard it. He pressed his stethoscope to her chest and heard the faint, irregular flutter of a heartbeat starting up again. Her chest began to rise and fall, shallow breaths at first, then deeper. Her eyes opened. Grace. The first word out of her mouth was her daughter's name. "Where's Grace? Is she all right?" Samuel rushed into the room, the baby in his arms. "She's here. She's perfect. She's right here." Eliza reached for her daughter with shaking hands. Samuel placed Grace in her arms and Eliza held her close, tears streaming down her face. "I heard her crying," Eliza whispered while I was wherever I was. "I heard her crying and I knew I had to come back. I couldn't leave her. I couldn't leave you." Dr. Howell examined her thoroughly. Apart from weakness and exhaustion, she seemed fine. Her heartbeat was strong and steady. Her breathing was normal. She was lucid and aware she had come back. For the third time, Eliza Wells had returned from death. This time, there was no public announcement, no funeral interrupted, no crowds of witnesses. Dr. Howell, Marcus, Catherine, and Samuel agreed that what had happened would remain private. They had learned their lesson about public scrutiny. Dr. Howell wrote a detailed account of all 3 incidents, but he kept it in his private files unpublished. He continued to study catopsy and apparent death, corresponding with physicians in Europe, but he never again mentioned Eliza by name in any public forum. Eliza recovered slowly from the birth and from her third death. She was weak for weeks, but gradually her strength returned. She devoted herself to caring for Grace, finding in motherhood a purpose and joy that helped her cope with the trauma of what she had experienced. The catalic episodes never returned. Whatever had caused them, whatever had caused those 3 terrible deaths and resurrections, seemed to have passed. Dr. Howell theorized that perhaps the pregnancy and birth had somehow altered Eliza's physiology, curing her of the condition, but it was only a theory. He had no proof, no real understanding of what had happened. Eliza and Samuel lived quietly, avoiding attention, raising their daughter. Grace grew into a healthy, bright child who knew nothing of her mother's strange history. They told her when she was old enough to understand, but by then it was just a story, something that had happened long ago. Marcus continued his furniture business until his death in 1867. Catherine lived until 1872, long enough to meet her great-grandchildren. Samuel became a successful businessman, eventually owning his own shipping office. Eliza lived to be 63 years old, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1895, a death that was, by all accounts, entirely normal and permanent. Dr. Nathaniel Howell kept his detailed records of Eliza's case until his own death in 1881. His papers were donated to the Charleston Medical Society, where they sat in archives, largely forgotten for decades. It wasn't until 1923 that a medical historian researching the history of catalepsy discovered Dr. Howell's files. The detailed accounts of Eliza Wells's 3 deaths and resurrections were published in a medical journal, causing a brief stir in the medical community. But by then, Everyone involved was long dead, and the case remained a medical curiosity debated but never fully explained. Modern medical science has theories. Catalepsy, locked-in syndrome, extreme bradycardia, conditions that can mimic death so closely that even trained physicians can be deceived. But none of these fully explain what happened to Eliza Wells. None explain how she could show signs of decay and then recover. None explain how she could survive being in a coffin underground for hours before being rescued. The truth is, we don't know. We may never know. What we do know is that Eliza Wells died 3 times in the span of 2 years. 3 times she was pronounced dead by a physician. 3 times her body showed all the signs of death, and 3 times impossibly she came back. Was it a medical phenomenon we don't yet understand? Was it something unique to Eliza's physiology? Or was it something else? Something that defies rational explanation? The records exist. Dr. Howell's detailed notes witnessed and corroborated by dozens of people, the death certificates signed and filed, the newspaper accounts from the time, the testimony of those who were there. Eliza Wells came back from the dead twice, and then a 3rd time, though that final resurrection was witnessed by only a handful of people who kept the secret for the rest of their lives. This mystery shows us that even in our modern age, with all our scientific knowledge, there are still things we cannot fully explain. Events that challenge our understanding of life and death. Stories that make us question the boundaries between the possible and the impossible. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Was it a medical condition we simply don't understand? Or was something else at play? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. See you in the next. 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 See you.